What the Actual Fork podcast is co-hosted by two intuitive eating registered dietitians, yours truly, Sammy Previtt, owner of Fine Food Freedom, and Jenna Warner, owner of Happy, Strong, Healthy. We can't stand diet culture bullshit and love keeping it real. Our mission is for all humans to believe that they are made for so much more than chasing a smaller body. We are also here to share with you that food can be fun and pleasurable again. Although we are medical professionals, we are human too. We are not afraid to share our deepest, darkest secrets and how years of our lives were taken by diet culture. We started this podcast so no human has to feel alone in their journey towards food freedom. So get comfy and join us for a casual convo where you can expect to laugh, cry, learn, and grow. Welcome back to another episode of What the Actual Fork podcast. Today we had Lauren Cadillac on, who is a registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and certified personal trainer. And this was her second time on the What the Actual Fork podcast. And if you have not already, you're definitely going to want to, especially after today, because we reference it. Go back and listen to her episode from season 1, where she tells her whole story about going from bodybuilding to intuitive eating.
This episode was really fun. Like, Lauren just has a very electric personality and we all click so well, but I think we're all in particularly good moods today, and it really showed in this episode.
I agree. It was like, if you're ready, it's like you want a lighthearted laugh and like laughing, it's great, but it also has like really, really, really important things for the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, as well as just like prepping you for not only Thanksgiving Day, but literally any holiday in the upcoming months or social event where you're going to be surrounded by family, loved one, and foods.
This is definitely one of those episodes that if you do have a notebook, or if you use your phone or scrap pieces of paper, napkins, whatever you do, you might want a pen and something to write on, because we do share a lot of really good takeaways. Like Sam said, there's action items, and we know that you guys are looking for more of that education sometimes and things that you can take away from these episodes, and we delivered today.
Yes, so without further ado, here is Lauren. Welcome back to another episode of What the Actual Fork podcast. Today we have somebody who is back for their second time. They were on season 1. Now they're back for season 2. We have registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor, Lauren Cadillac, otherwise known as Feel Good Dietitian. Thank you so much for being here again with us, Lauren.
Woo! Thank you for having me again. I'm excited to chat. Yeah.
Like a party.
Like we needed like the clapping hands to go off.
Yeah.
Like,
All around.
I don't know why, but I feel like all three of us are slap happy right now. Like we're in this.
I just ate lunch.
Maybe that's it. It's just like post lunch, like chilling. We're all excited to be together.
Penn State no, just kidding. We had a terrible loss this weekend. I'm going to be like, we had a big win. No, just kidding.
Did we lose? I didn't even watch. I'm the worst.
Yeah, it's fine.
Whatever, guys.
It's fine. I'm going to throw a curveball that we did not talk about before we started recording, and that Jen and I talked about like very briefly on a voice memo, but you are going to be the first, we can drum roll it, that we're going to ask this question. So for the What the Actual Fork podcast, with the name What the Actual Fork, kind of reminds us of what the actual fuck, right? Like someone saying that.
Yeah.
So we want to know from you, Lauren, it could be like the most memorable one that's ever happened to you, or it could be something that you literally just saw 5 minutes before scrolling on TikTok. Give us something diet culture-y that happened to you, or that you read, or that you saw, whether it was a day ago, a week ago, or in your lifetime, that made you just stop and say, what's the actual fork? Like,
ooh. I mean, I feel like my entire time in the bodybuilding industry, like reflecting back on that experience and thinking about how coaches who are most oftentimes male coaches were telling like women what they should be eating, how much they should be working out, what their body should look like. I mean, I remember I had a coach who said something to me that was like, what the actual fork? Like, I was really self-conscious about being constipated before going out on stage because you were so dehydrated and I couldn't poop. So I felt like I just like had like a little bit of a belly because whatever. And he was like, your gut's always been bigger than your butt. And just like little things like that where you're like, why is it okay for someone to just comment on my body all the time? And like, why am I paying this person? So I think my entire time in the bodybuilding industry would just be one overarching what the actual fork.
This is the perfect way to open up this new series on our podcast because you just set the bar really high.
Yes. And then for anyone who's like listening to that, like, I want to know more about your experience in the bodybuilding industry, go back and listen to Lauren's episode on season 1 of What the Actual Fork, where we dig deep into that. So
yes.
Can I just like jump in and say that I had one of these moments this weekend? Actually, it was yesterday when I went to this like famous diner in New Jersey. Lauren, I think you saw this story. And they're like famous. They have over 250 different types of omelets on this menu. The menu is gigantic. It hasn't been updated in many moons, but they had a little box in the menu next to all these delicious things called the Dietitian Meal, spelled wrong. And it was spinach with cottage cheese and berries and a raspberry glaze and nuts. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, why the fuck?
What is that
on here? What is this combination? And also, like, why are we calling it the dietitian meal? Like, this is why people hate dietitians. Like, because they think this is what we want you to eat at this delicious restaurant. I got the Greek omelet with like extra feta and extra everything, and it was so good. And I'm like, it just like literally sat with me in my DMs. I probably had like 60 people that were like, what the fuck?
I feel like that's so many
actual fork.
Exactly. I feel like I've had so many people, even when they are doing like a discovery call and they know the kind of work that I do, just the idea of me being a dietitian, because I think so many people have gone to dietitians in the past and have recommended things like cottage cheese and raspberry glaze or whatever that is. And there's like in spinach. Yeah. And it's just like this reaction of like, oh, these are, this person's gonna basically starve me. So yeah, that sucks to see that.
Well, unfortunately, I think all three of us, like as dietitians, would have probably recommended that as something at some point or another. So like, unfortunately, that makes sense why that's on there. But fortunately, we are all on the other side of the fence now, and happy to say that we would not be recommending that at a restaurant with 250 amazing omelets. So
it sounds like a terrible combination, even if I was still recommending those things.
Yes.
Maybe have it in a different way.
Absolutely. So Jenna, I'm going to pass it over to you because I know you and I were both stalking Lauren, and you found this post and you wanted to call it out. So take it away with that.
This post stopped me in my tracks for a couple of reasons. One, because the images are just fantastic, but I think the message is so good on this post that you posted last week, but also because I love, Lauren, the way that you pair the education with the intuitive eating and anti-diet message on your page. And this one specifically, and I know today we really want to talk about the holidays and the upcoming, just maybe pressures is not the right word, but just anxiety about being in shared meal settings and, family functions for some people. But your post about, is the scale doing more harm than good? Not only do you share different scenarios and the actual just like science that happens in your body, can you share just like where the inspiration for this came from and what this post like really means to you and what message you're really trying to drive home?
I think so many people just rely on the scale to, one, determine their worth, but also to try to like, quote, keep themselves in check. And I think they see the scale as a tool that is helpful rather than harmful. And I'm sure you've both seen in your practice, when someone finally gets rid of the scale, how much easier of a time they have connecting to the cues of their body, because they no longer have that number in the back of their head being like, oh, I was up a pound this morning, I was down a pound, so I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. So I think a lot of the inspiration just kind of comes from conversations that I have in my group setting and my one-on-one conversations. But I really wanted to just kind of get across the point that your scale's probably actually causing more harm than, it's actually helping you.
I love that. So simply put, but I also think that it's important to note for the holidays, because when Jenna said this, I was like, that when I think back to my like heavy disordered eating days, like for some reason the holidays, like especially in college, I feel like coming home for the holidays, I would be like, oh, well, I'm gonna air quotes be so good at home. And just like you said, like keep myself in check, heavy air quotes. When really, when I would do that and try that, the opposite thing would happen, because I would see a number I didn't want to see or whatever it was. And then it would cause me to overeat or to binge, feel the guilt and shame, etc. So for anybody who, with the holidays coming up, with, you know, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's, all these things coming up that are like, I'm going to be good for the holidays and I'm going to keep myself in check, what would you say to them?
I would maybe suggest they kind of look at their patterns, like what has occurred in the past for them. Like every time they try to be quote unquote good, every time they try to eat super clean, quote, quote, like every time they try to do these things, like what tends to follow after that? Like you just said, you know, try to be good, I try to be clean, and then I end up binging on something, or I end up eating to a point where I'm super uncomfortable. And I get it. Like there's so much pressure, especially if you're coming back from college. I think there's that pressure of maybe seeing, I don't know about both of you, but the night before Thanksgiving for us was always like a high school reunion, and you would go back and you would see everyone. So there was that pressure around looking a certain way for people you haven't seen in a while. And then maybe you're going to be around family members that are on a diet or making comments about their body or your body or whatever. So I understand that there is so much pressure, and that's super valid. But I think, again, just kind of reflecting on your past experience, like, hey, every time I do this, what kind of happens? Does it lead to a binge? Is there like a different way I could maybe approach this?
Yes, everything. Yes. And the other piece of this post that you have on here is the stress aspect, where you have written out here, you know, after you start dieting and restricting, after maybe seeing a number that you were not expecting to see, you have it written very perfectly clearly as living in a chronic state of low level stress about weight and food. And so one of the things, and we have an episode in season 1 with Janine Standish, Sam, where we talked about this so much. We all had this like aha moment where when we recognize that the stress that we feel about weight or food, or self or body is actually doing more harm than any food we could possibly eat. And so just to like call that out clearly, like that chronic stress that you're feeling from this experience, or perhaps the holidays or upcoming situations, is actually causing harm to your body. And I don't think that we talk about that enough.
People often ask me, what is your favorite quick, easy, convenient breakfast idea? And my absolute favorite fall go-to has been frozen pumpkin waffles that I toast up in my toaster oven. I spread some 88 acres sunflower seed butter on top, sprinkle some chia seeds, top with some blueberries, and then finish it up with a nice drizzle of honey. This meal is the perfect combination of soft, creamy seed butter with those crunchy waffles and crisp berries right on top. And although I don't personally have food allergies, I absolutely love all of the 88 Acres products, which just happen to be free of the top 8 allergens, 9 including sesame. So to try out the magic, head over to 88acres.com/WTAF and use code WTAF for 15% off site-wide, and make sure to DM us and let us know what product you like best.
And it's so ironic in that a lot of times we use food to cope with our stress. So like it just is like this vicious cycle where you're stressed out about the food, and then you use food to cope with the stress that you're feeling, and you kind of just go round and round.
I relate to that so much. Like I think back to my like disordered eating, Sammy, and like that is just like, that's hitting the nail on the head. And so it's so like when clients say, but you don't understand, like if I don't have control, right, then I'll eat everything in sight. And it's that natural fear that comes up with intuitive eating. But as we know, like it's not going to be like that forever, and we can make peace with food. You said something that I think was so so good to go back to. And I think now we know exactly when we're going to be releasing this episode. So let's talk Wednesday before Thanksgiving, right? It's like the biggest party night of the year. It's like this is a terrible stat, but I think it's like the number one DUIs, like every year they say, like it sets records.
Sure.
So we know people are partying and they're coming home and they're seeing friends and family members. So for those who are stressed about that or already thinking about seeing others, what words of wisdom would you have for them, or just any pieces of advice?
I would probably say the people that care to see you and that you care to see don't really care how you look. I mean, if you think about even just with the pandemic, if you went however many months or years or whatever before you saw someone that you really loved, like when you did see them, you were just happy to be near them. You were just happy to spend time together. And then the people that are judging you, like I kind of have had those thoughts in the past too, like, oh, I'm going to see so-and-so. I'm like, you were a complete jerk to me in high school. Why do I give a shit what you think about me? Like, who are you? You know, like the people that care and that are your people, the people that care about you and are your people will not care how you look. And the ones that do care how you look are not your people. Amazing. So Chad from like social studies can just screw off. I actually don't know any Chads, but you get the point.
Fucking Chad.
Freaking Chad.
That needs to be the name of this episode. Fucking Chad from social studies.
Fuck off.
That should be something that you start on TikTok. Start a new trend. Forget Karen. Let's go to Chad.
I've done a couple where I draw a mustache on, and people seem to like that. So maybe that's like my new series.
Your alter ego.
Yes.
The shit we do for TikTok, man.
Yeah, seriously. Okay. Oh my God. Sammy, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how.
I don't even know what you guys are talking about. You also make videos all the time. We do the same shit.
You have a lot of more people commenting on TikTok.
The voices that she comes up with kill me. And I was reading, I think I was like deep diving one of your comment sections once, and they were like, ooh, when she makes that voice, she sounds crazy, or like something like that. And they were like ripping you on this voice. And I was like, this is why you're all coming back though. Like,
yes. Yes, engagement.
Yes. But it's funny because like I've never read that comment. Like I have no idea.
You don't read that.
Like I literally, like you said, like no. And obviously I love the people that are there to support. And I'm sure as we all do love our communities, but
yeah.
Ooh, TikTok finds a lot of people that do not love and support us. Yeah. That's for sure.
Yeah. That means you're doing something right.
Correct. Well, speaking of not TikTok at all or anything that has to do with anything we just said, Sam, you've had an idea for this episode that you will explain way more eloquently than I could. And I'm excited to hear Lauren's answer to it. So
yes,
that question.
Yes. So I feel like we've talked, and I should know this, but we've done so many episodes now, like going through a lot of the principles specifically, one being challenging the food police, but not only that, thinking about like, okay, what type of eater are you? And there's, I think, I don't know if there's a whole chapter, there's definitely like parts in the intuitive eating book about like, what type of eater are you? And there's thinking about the Clean Your Plate Club, or I believe they categorize it in intuitive eating as refuse not eater. So we're going to let Lauren just calmly flip to that page in the intuitive eating book. And again, so where I want to kind of pull from on this is everybody going home for Thanksgiving, right? Or for any holiday meal over the next few months. I think there's a lot of pressure in families I know like my husband has an Italian family. I come from a Greek family. It's like, you clean your plate, you clean your second plate, like kind of growing up with those cues of like, you're not air quotes full until you're very uncomfortable, and you shouldn't leave the table until you finish that. Then feeling pressures, whether it's from loved ones or socially, to like have a dessert or try something that someone cooked. So I'd love to hear from you for people that like, how do you define a Clean Your Plate Club eater or a refuse not eater, and what would be some tips or some things you think would be helpful for them to hear?
Well, if you'd like, I found it right in the book. I can read. It's like I've got my handy dandy intuitive eating book. Got copies all over the place. Okay. So on page 36, if you have the fourth edition, the refuse not unconscious eater. This eater is vulnerable to the mere presence of food, regardless if hungry or full. Candy jars, food lying around at meetings, food sitting on a kitchen counter will not usually be passed up by the refuse not unconscious eater. Most of the time, however, refuse not unconscious eaters are not aware that they are eating or how much they are eating. For example, the refuse not unconscious eater may pluck up a couple of candies on the way to the restroom without being aware of it. Social outings that revolve around food, such as cocktail parties and holiday buffets, are especially challenging for the refuse not unconscious eater. So I think part of that stems from, I think there's a couple of things, like lack of mindfulness, I think is a big theme in all things intuitive eating, just being mindful of like what's actually going on, how you're feeling, if you're hungry, if you want the food, if it sounds good, if it doesn't sound good. I think some of that also comes from the like Last Supper mentality, where if you feel like you shouldn't be eating something, or if it's a holiday, this is the last time I'm going to get that, so I need to have it all now without paying attention to if I'm actually hungry or full. And then I think there's some of like the clean plate club, where you grew up in a home where you were told that you have to finish all of your food, even if you were comfortably full or beyond that. Or maybe you had to finish your food in order to get dessert or whatever it might have been. And then I think there's also the other part where you don't want to come off as rude, and culturally it's seen as offensive if somehow you don't finish everything on your plate. So I think there's kind of a couple of things at play, making sure that you're kind of being mindful, checking in with your body, giving yourself that permission to have what you want when you want it, so that you don't have that Last Supper mentality. And I think becoming comfortable with setting boundaries and articulating your needs with people around you, and saying something, you know, if a family member is pushing something on you, especially around the holidays, maybe saying something like, this was so delicious. I'm pretty comfortably full right now, and if I have any more, I'm going to be really uncomfortable. Do you think I could take some home though, so that I can enjoy it again tomorrow? So that it's not coming across as, oh, I actually don't like your food, but it's just like, no, I like it. I want to respect my body and feel good. So yeah, what do you guys think about that? I feel like there's a lot of kind of things at play in those situations.
I think you were the perfect person to answer this question, because it was an amazing answer. And I think something that comes up for me is like, you're never going to make everyone in the room happy, right? And we always focus on everyone else in the room except for ourselves. And like, I remember in my super disordered days, Thanksgivings or family functions or whatever it is, people like commenting on my plate, like, oh, if she's going to eat that, then I can too. And it's like a lot of pressure. Or if it's like, oh, you're really going to eat that, it's like, you can't, you're never going to please the room. So we need to stop trying and like take that pressure off of ourselves and just honor, like you said, your body. And again, that example was very fucked up in the past of just my past disordered Jenna days. But I think that a lot of our clients that are in recovery do feel a lot of pressure that people are quote unquote watching what they're eating, and it's not fair. And so somehow there needs to be a statement that says, keep your eyes off my fucking plate.
Yes. Mind your damn business. And I think maybe it's Brie, body image with Brie, for anyone that's
She comes up in everyone's
yeah. I feel like I reference Brianna or Christy Harrison like every time I have a conversation. But and maybe it's not Brianna, but I feel like it sounds like something she would say, just putting other people's comfort before your own. Like, I don't want to hurt someone's feelings, even if it means that it causes me physical discomfort. It's like we've been taught to do that when there's a way to articulate your needs and also feel physically good.
I love that. I think that's so important. And I forget if you just mentioned this before we even get to the Clean Your Plate Club part, but I think often people think that because of years past, right, and the patterns that they've developed around food and their relationship with food, they just are fearful going into Thanksgiving, thinking like, I'm going to eat everything and I'm out of control. And then I think this is where with intuitive eating, we can't talk about like one piece of it without blending another piece in. Like, do not go into your Thanksgiving dinner starving yourself, like, period, because you will clean your plate because you're fucking hungry. And like, I think that's like an important thing to take note of, where that has really nothing to do with necessarily the Clean Your Plate Club, except for make sure that you treat Thanksgiving Day just as if it were a Monday or a Saturday or a vacation day or a work day or like every day is the same. Our body needs consistent fuel and hydration. And if you do not give it that on Thanksgiving Day, you probably will clean your plate and a second plate and feel physically uncomfortable. But that's just because you were really hungry. And it's important to be able to kind of like differentiate that, because I know just knowing where our listeners kind of struggle, similar to all of our past, like if you are restricting, if you are starving yourself, there's a very high chance of binging at a holiday meal as well.
Yeah. And I think if we've all here been in that place where we've binged in the past, like maybe we've convinced ourselves, like, I'm eating, I'm not restricting that much, but even just that mental restriction of, oh, I'm going to go into this meal and be quote unquote good or whatever, like even that can lead to a binge. But I think same with kind of what you were getting at was like, obviously all of the principles of intuitive eating work together and build on each other. But that second principle being honor your hunger, like it's number 2 for a reason, right? Like you need to meet your body's need for food. So make sure you're doing that. Don't skip meals before you go into a Thanksgiving Day. You just send yourself up for a stomachache.
Yes, feeling very, very physically unpleasant.
Yes.
Jenna, I see you're excited to talk, so I'm handing it over to you.
No, I just love this conversation. It's like what's coming up for me is just like the previous Thanksgivings that I've had when I was living in that very disordered state. And there's just so many ways we could take this conversation if we're focusing on this holiday. And I think the reality is, I don't even know what it is, but I think the most important thing to drive home is really a conversation on setting boundaries. And we just released a podcast episode about that a couple weeks ago. But the truth is like, you don't owe anyone in the room anything or any explanation. Like nobody needs to know about your relationship with food. I have this sticker on my water bottle, Sam. I know you have this in shirts. Like, I don't give a fuck about your diet. Like, I don't want to talk about my food preferences. Like, the most unsettling thing for me is really what it comes back to what you said before, Lauren, like when you haven't seen people in a long time, like why are we talking about food and our diets or, you know, the things that we're not eating when we can talk about all of these other things that are happening in the world or in our lives are exciting things. And that's really where the conversation needs to change. And maybe where we take the rest of this episode is like, what are a couple tidbits that we can share with our listeners for things that they can say to rude family members or friends or people that are making these comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of how you respond really has a lot to do with your relationship with the person. Like, have you had conversations with them in the past about what you're going through and what you're trying to recover from? Or is this a very new, fresh conversation? Is this a random uncle that just makes weird comments? And or is it a friend? You know, so I think it's like assessing who you're talking to and, you know, reflecting on the conversations you've had in the past. I think there's Claire tuning. Yes. She did like a funny reel, probably like a year ago, but it was like how to respond to comments. And one of them that really stuck out to me was just like completely changing the topic. And I think she was outside eating and she's like, oh, look, the squirrel, like just completely like changing it to something else, you know, or like if someone says, oh, my jeans aren't going to fit, blah, 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 like saying something like, oh my gosh, I actually just went to this new store called blah, 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 and got this. Like, have you ever heard of it? Or have you gone, whatever, just like using something in the sentence that they said as an opportunity to start talking about something else. You know, I think some people might respond with like a snarky comment. Some people might say like, keep your eyes on your own plate, or my body's not up for discussion. But again, I think it really is up to the person's kind of like comfort level and, you know, who they're talking to. I think the changing the topic can be good, or just getting up and like walking away, getting more food, or like going to the bathroom or something. What do you guys think?
I love all of those. I always reference the fake phone call, just like pretend like somebody's calling you and be like, sorry, I got to take this, and just go.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think it comes down to your relationship with the person, also your personality. Like, are you a smart ass? Are you funny?
Sure.
Are you snarky? Like, how would you normally respond? But I think
Totally.
a big part of it, which we're talking about right now, which is awesome for every single person listening, is role playing it. And I know that's something we all do with our clients is like right now, somebody is listening to this podcast and this is your opportunity to role play. What is the worst case scenario of what a loved one or a family member could say to me? And then thinking, maybe pulling out your phone and putting some things in your phone notes of like, just like Lauren said, like changing the subject and walking away, fake phone call, going to grab seconds, whatever it is. So when that happens, we don't let the emotional response take over. And then we don't get to react in a way that like serves or honors what we would want to say. Because I think sometimes when people say that something, let's say about the keto diet or the pants not fitting or whatever, we have this emotional response. And we want to like either yell at them, hit them, get upset, whatever it is. And so I think it's like role playing it and taking a deep breath and knowing that you have these little tools in your toolbox. So then it's like, it's not surprising when people say this shit and you can get out of the conversation and get away.
Totally. Yeah. Being prepared, because especially if you have a family that that always comes up in, I think role playing preparation is definitely key.
Smart. It's really smart and so helpful. And if you guys listening don't feel comfortable doing it with a friend, record yourself, right? Like do it in front of the camera or on Zoom with yourself staring at the camera. It could be a good way to just like hear yourself saying those words confidently and like knowing that you're capable of doing that. Sometimes I find that with clients that I've worked with in the past, like we tell them these things and they're like, I can't do that. And it's like, you have to visualize yourself being capable of doing the task. And sometimes it's really just seeing yourself do it. And so videotaping can be really helpful.
Yeah.
And I think knowing too that like boundaries are hard, right? Like they're so hard, especially for the fellow people pleasers out there. And so like you said, Jen, if someone just jumps like, I can't do that, like you can, it's okay if it's like really uncomfortable at first. And especially setting boundaries with family or loved ones, like that can be those can be some of the hardest people to set boundaries with. But just know like, it's okay if it doesn't come easy to you.
I think what's hard too in a situation like a family holiday meal is that there's other people around. It's one thing to have a conversation with like your mom about setting boundaries and maybe having her not make comments on your body or whatever it is. But when there's 15 people around and someone 6 people down yells something at you across the table, like it's a very different dynamic than it would be one-on-one. So I think that definitely adds like a layer of stress to the situation.
Yeah.
And this is like potentially the first year in 2, maybe, that larger family gatherings safely are happening. So there could be more fear and anxiety or stress around them. If that is what's going on for you listening, just know that you're not alone. And we have lots of podcast episodes to support you.
Yes. Basically, if you see the word boundaries in any podcast, just click that one and go take a listen. So Lauren, for anyone who's listening that just really wants to learn more from you, I'm sure they already follow you, but if not, where is the best place that they can find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Feel Good Dietitian or on TikTok, Feel Good Dietitian. I also have a website, laurencadillac.com.
Guys, thank you so much for listening to another episode of What the Actual Fork Pod. We know there are a lot of pods out there, and we are so grateful that you are here listening with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, like, share with all your friends and faves, and follow along with us on social at What the Actual Fork Pod. We promise to continue to bring you the hottest topics, greatest guests, and the most fun you can possibly have while fighting diet culture bullshit. We love you, we appreciate you, and we will see you next week for a lot more fun.